I would like to ask everybody in this audience right now, how many of you voted for Jeffrey Epstein for anything? And yet he had power, an immense amount of power that you don't have. He had a lot of power, and the people moving around him had a lot of power. And they just recently flexed and demonstrated that power to keep you from knowing the truth of the story. And to this hour, the government is not in compliance with the Massie Khanna bill that was passed to reveal things. They are still hiding investigative information, which they were required to turn over. They normally wouldn't be, but it was spelled out that they could, that they should. And they are supposed to reveal the people who were involved. And they have not. They said flat out they're not going to do it. They're hiding behind a Privacy Act that was expressly addressed in the bill and said, no, you can't use this.
Instead of conflict and aggression, here's governance built on grace. Welcome to Gracearchy with Jim Babka.
We're focused today not on the details of the Epstein case. Lots of others doing that finally. But today we want to offer you 5 profound lessons from the Epstein saga, and if time permits, a bonus lesson or 2. This is a package of lessons you're unlikely to hear anywhere else. So Jim, run us through it. Let's see what we've got here.
All right, well, let's start off by putting the lessons on the screen so everybody can see what we're going to cover. 1, large conspiracies can exist in secret for decades. 2, all nation states have deep states. 3, major international corruption is like a criminal gang. 4, rational apathy is real. And 5, Pizzagate turns out to be essentially real.
I'm going to ask you about rational apathy when we get to that, just for clarity.
Okay.
And for clarity, conspiracy means anybody as a group who has decided to do something for a purpose with a desired result. And they could be crazy or they could be real. We've talked about that before, and we'll link in this episode to our conspiracy channel playlist on Zero Aggression Project. By the way, zap the state and have a nice day.
All right, let's start off with number 1. Large conspiracies can exist in secret for decades. In the conspiracy channel that you just mentioned a moment ago, we have some episodes about the Kennedy assassination. And I was, until late 2022, maybe it's 23 now, I've lost track of time, of the belief that the official story, which was that one lone nut shot from the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository, was the be-all and end-all of that story. There was nothing else to see here. But through a lot of research, I found out that was wrong. There's more on that in the episodes that we've already done on this subject. But one of the questions I would get when people ask me like what I believe or why I believe certain things about this story is, well, certainly someone would have talked. There would have been people who would have whispered and shared things. And, why don't we have that information? Well, a guy named Larry Hancock actually wrote a book that was titled Someone Would Have Talked. And it's a hard read. It's a very valuable read. It's a compendium of people who did talk and why what they talked about might be right. But it is based on the idea that the people talked, and some people are even corroborated by other people talking. So there was talking. And even in this particular conspiracy we're talking about, things did leak out over the years. We are learning new things now with the recent data dump, but there was material leaked out over the years. There were things that happened. There was even a prosecution and a plea deal. We were aware there were issues all along. And these things develop very slowly. But the idea that this was treated as a conspiracy theory as late as the president's inauguration in January of 2025. Almost the entire Democratic Party believed it was a conspiracy theory at that time. Now, when they saw that there was a political opportunity with Trump, they changed their minds, fortunately, and now more information has begun to come out. But a large conspiracy can exist. This Epstein saga shows us that a large conspiracy can exist for a long time and that people will keep quiet. I understand the notion. There is this saying that a secret is best kept between 2 men when one of them is dead. But the fact of the matter is that when the stakes are high enough, it does appear to be the case that extraordinary efforts can be put out to make sure that you quell and cover up and keep quiet a story. And lots of people are willing to go along with, well, it's just a conspiracy theory. We don't have the actual evidence. That's still happening even right now. I've had conversations recently where saying, well, it's, you kept saying it would be this or it'd be that. There is a strong tendency to want to, in some cases, even believe it's a conspiracy.
Nudge, nudge, wink, wink. It's easier to sort of accept the unknown.
So large conspiracies, I just want everybody to understand, can exist in secret for decades. Okay, this is an illustration. This Epstein saga is proof of that point. Number two, all nation states have deep states. And this means they have some things to sell and clients who buy the products. So your politicians, almost everybody does not understand what a politician really is. Most people think, well, this is my representative. That's what the Constitution says. And they've been elected to Congress and they express the will of the people. No, they don't. What they do for the most part is they move money. They are money movers. So people go to Washington and they lobby, and there's significant effort and time and money and a bunch of other things put into lobbying so that people can get something bigger out of it. Okay. Now, there are people who go there because they have certain concerns that they want to advance and they're kind of more, driven by some moral or just cause. But a lot of what goes on is transferring money from one place to the other. And that's what the politicians are there to do. And of course, they deliver that back to voters so they can acquire the votes they need. And they deliver it to donors and supporters so that they can get the funding that they need for their campaigns. And this is how the system works. So the thing to sell is influence, power, money, government contracts. And there are people who line up to get a piece of that pie.
Sure.
Now, one more thing. All nation states have deep states. Every organization you've ever been to has a deep organization. There are a group of people who run things. Some of them will be the officers of the club. Some of them will be the people that have title. But there will be other people that are kind of behind the scenes that are very, very potent and powerful that work with that. This is a dynamic that happens at the micro level. The idea that somehow or other, and political science has barely touched this. In fact, they've mocked this idea. The idea that that phenomenon would not continue when the pie is so much larger is so bizarre to me. Like if you belong to a small club and the budget, they've got the kitty $45 right now. Well, the deep club probably isn't that important. Okay. Why wouldn't it be vastly more important if we were talking about an institution that had the power to initiate force against people, to point guns at them and say, you will do this, and that had a huge treasury on which it could spend? It should be obvious to everybody in the inept field of political science that the deep state exists. Number three, major international corruption is like a criminal gang. Criminal gang. A gang is like a mafia or a club that is basically there to exploit some opportunity and maybe even take advantage of black market opportunities. And best as I can tell, the conspiracy that's occurring around Epstein, who is so super well connected to people all over the planet, there should be a hyper focus on that far more than whether or not he killed himself. I happen to believe he did, but it doesn't materially change the story or reveal the most important part of it. Whether or not they were engaged in really awful, disgusting sexual behavior, that is important, but it is not the story. The story is the fact that there were rich people connected to this thing, and there were sovereign leaders from all over the globe. And they were in his Rolodex. So there was a man you never heard of who had the ability to make things happen behind the scenes. He could grease things. He could get people in rooms. He could facilitate the movement of money. He could launder the money. He could move arms or assist people in moving arms, or he can acquire a plane. He was an acquisition. He's kind of the Radar O'Reilly of the deep state. And he got paid really, really well for this.
Oh, surely did. Just incredibly.
And he was sharing with his best friends the ability to profit. They would supply money and then get return on investment. And this was a criminal gang. Okay, so if you're going to join a criminal gang, you probably need to commit a crime. Like you need to show that you're one of us. You need to show that like you can pass the initiation test. You need to get a mark. You need to get a murder. You need to do something that shows it. And one way that we probably need to think about the sexual aspects of this story, which are completely deplorable and disgusting, is that they were initiation rites. Now, other people have conjectured that there was maybe some blackmail going on here, and that surely seems to be the case. But there's an email from Epstein to himself regarding Bill Gates. So to be clear, we don't know whether Bill Gates actually received this email. We don't even know if the facts that are stated in this email are completely true. But Epstein's spirit and mind are revealed in the email, and they match other things about his relationship with the president of the United States. So I want you to think about what I'm about to say in the following way. If you are engaged in the regular market and you are trading in something, you may set up a contract. And that contract, since the whole thing is legal, can be reviewed in court. We can bring in the judge. We can bring in a jury if we need to. We can settle any dispute about a contract. If somebody walks away and doesn't pay, or they don't fulfill the terms of the agreement, we have a way of doing this. But what is your method if you're operating in the black market? What do you do now? There's no judge or court necessarily you can go to. And in fact, you're dealing with people who are pretty powerful, pretty rich. How do you get them? Well, you make sure that they've passed your initiation test where they've committed or done something that is blackmailable.
I see where you're going, Jim. Yes.
Okay. So you keep out all the goody two shoes from your situation. Anybody that's going to get a little weak kneed, anybody that has a sense of morality that might kind of ruin the game, because large conspiracies ain't going to last long if somebody blows the whistle. And two, you make sure that they stick around and they follow through on their goals because you have the goods on them. It's not so much about what you can extract from them. It's about how much they're profiting. And it's about making sure that when the bill is due to get your cut, you get your cut. So was he getting finder's fees for setting up a transaction? Was he getting commissions on loans and other parts of the transaction? Was he collecting money both directions or just one? We don't know. It probably varied from time to time, but he appears to have brought these people lucrative black market deals that were perhaps intelligence connected to one state or another. And how do you keep everybody honest? How do you make sure they pay their bills? Well, you set up a ritual or a process that gets everybody involved. Criminals commit crime. We shouldn't be completely surprised. All right. Rational apathy is real. So you said you have a question here, Bill.
Yeah. Is this just like looking the other way? You see it and you keep walking?
Yeah.
Or is there something else involved in that?
Well, we all understand what apathy is, right? Apathy is that you say, I basically don't care. I'll be fine. Rational means that you've thought it through and it turns out there's a really good reason for you not to care. Mainly that you're powerless. You don't believe you can actually change the outcome. So you got a list of things you're concerned about over the course of a day. The things that you're going to leave out are the things you have the least control over.
Sure. This is you walk out of Starbucks and there's a homeless person asking for money and you just keep walking because you know you can't fix it with $1 or something.
Okay, that could be one thing. Yes. And this, in fact, the place this comes from that I understand it from is called public choice theory, which is a review of how people act in the political process. It's an economic study that recognizes that every person in the process is a human being with motives. Right. This is an angelic process. This is a real human process with all the messiness.
It's starting to apply to Epstein now. I can see how how this fits.
Okay. So voters, I want to say first, voters don't own the government. Everybody pretends they do. Your vote doesn't matter. For the president of the United States, it turns out that this deep state we just spoke of a few minutes ago actually has a tremendous amount of control over the outcome. Now, I would like to ask everybody in this audience right now, how many of you voted for Jeffrey Epstein for anything? And yet he had power, an immense amount of power that you don't have. In fact, if you get your 10 best friends together, he had more power than your 10 best friends. Okay. He had a lot of power. And the people moving around him had a lot of power. And they just recently flexed and demonstrated that power over the past 20 years to keep you from knowing the truth of this story. And to this hour, the government is not in compliance with the bill that was passed, the Massie Khanna bill that was passed to reveal things. They are still hiding investigative information, which they were required to turn over. They normally wouldn't be, but it was spelled out that they should. And they are supposed to reveal the people who were involved. And they have not. They said flat out they're not going to do it. They're hiding behind a Privacy Act that was expressly addressed in the bill and said, no, you can't use this. This bill passed with only one dissenting vote in the House. This bill passed through the Senate without even a vote. It went through by unanimous consent. There's no dissent whatsoever, straight through. And it was signed by the president on the very same day. And they have been out of compliance in several different ways since. They continue at this hour here in early February to remain out of compliance with this law. And so people say to me, well, Jim, we're never going to get to the bottom of this. And by the way, they said the same thing about the Kennedy experiment. Well, we're never going to get to the bottom of this. And this apathy that you have, is part of the problem. So if everybody really cared about holding them accountable, and they weren't kind of sucked up into a party that settled everything in advance, and you said, no, we're not going to vote party anymore, we're going to start to vote our principle, the whole thing becomes far less predictable to these guys. And the defections at that point suddenly start to matter. And so while you sit around going, well, we'll never be able to solve this, we'll never be able to figure this out, you are disempowering yourself. And these are the very same people that thought their vote counted when they went to the election place. Folks, pick a side, but I will tell you, your vote didn't count because it was committed already to a party. But it can count a lot on an issue.
Yeah, just turn off your rational apathy and engage in some way, which, by the way, is what Jim's done with the Kennedy assassination conspiracy that we've covered. But how does the average Joe turn off their apathy on this one?
This show is brought to you by the Zero Aggression Project. Zap newsletter subscribers get alerts when each episode is released. The Zap website is also the pathway by which you can contact us by email and support the show. This program operates thanks to tax-deductible Zap contributions, and we appreciate your support. So, zap the state, and have a nice day.
Well, you find ways that you can increase your leverage, okay? And one way that you increase your leverage is to pick up the phone and call your representative or senator. Another way that you increase your leverage is to get other people to go along with you in doing something like that. Even better, if a group of you went into the office. This is the message that we put out on Downsize DC all the time, the other organization I co-created. You could gain leverage on those points, and you can gain it rapidly because the competition level is a lot thinner.
It's not about a protest. It's about doing specific things.
Protest seems to work too. It's got all this. You got to start thinking more strategic.
Yes.
They want you to think about, you only have two choices at election time. That's a rigged game that they've set up. Now, if we got out of the party system and we were willing to take a loss here and there, we could completely break that thing. It is there to be broken if people will think logically about their vote. But there are so many ways before then, so many other ways that you could have more power over the system. I want people to understand that if you believe you're powerless here, yet your vote is crucial, you are a walking contradiction.
Yeah, you're practicing rational apathy.
Right.
Let's move on.
All right. Number 5. Pizzagate turns out to be essentially real, and even I'm surprised by it, because this was originally a QAnon conspiracy. There was this idea out there. It was in the 2010s, and it was on various channels that some of which most people weren't accessing on the internet, but there was a discussion group. A lot of our politics have been influenced by something called 4chan. I don't understand 4chan. I'm too old and I wasn't paying attention to what was going on with that at the time. But from this, a whole discussion of code, language emerges. And there were people beginning to pick up clues at the time. And there was even a man who walked into a pizza place that he believed was involved in the conspiracy and pulled his shotgun. I don't remember if it was at the ceiling or the floor. I think it was at the ceiling. He was arrested. He voluntarily surrendered. He believed he was going in to rescue abused children. And everybody dismissed it. Ha, 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 Pizzagate. Oh, that dumb fool that walked in there. Ha, 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 ha. This is a conspiracy, people. These knuckle draggers believe this thing. Well, it turns out again and again and again, code language shows up in the Epstein files. And I just want to focus on one word because apparently it meant something in code. And it's the word pizza. Bill, would you like to take a guess how many times the word pizza shows up in the Epstein files? Because once I tell you the number, you will not forget it. I'm going to give you the number and you will not forget it. You want to take a guess?
Millions?
911 times. 911, 911, 911 times
No.
the word pizza shows up. Now, I imagine as we gain more information over time, that number will adjust, but you now know the minimum number is nearly 1,000. It is 911. 911 times the word pizza shows up in there. And it shows up in ways where, like, if you know, you know, or we're in the know.
Yeah.
And it shows up with other stuff. There's a pizza handkerchief and there's a pizza and grape soda. And it is disgusting. I don't know what these things necessarily mean. I don't actually really want to know, but there's a lot of smoke here that this is code that pedophiles use, and the origin of it was likely all the way back from revealings by other pedophiles on 4chan. So apparently there's a whole, I don't know, subculture that has a specific coded language. Our elites were in on it. And we see this in the emails and we see this in other documentation. And it's appalling. It's appalling. Now, I think there's something important to say at this juncture, which is that on top of the rational apathy we just discussed, there's a denialism that takes place where we think, wow, these people cannot possibly be this awful. They cannot possibly, it's like, what are they doing? It's almost like there's like this ritualistic child sacrifice going on in the midst of all of this. And we think this is kind of crazy.
I'm curious right now, how does anyone escape this? If you're in that echelon of moving and shaking, were you immune?
They were looking to get extra power and money. There was, escaping it was not participating. You could have chose not to be a part of this. And not everybody, by the way, that sat in Epstein's dining room in Manhattan is a participant in these other activities. Like, he liked to pull together smart people, and he had certain hobbies and interests and things he wanted to understand about biology, race, mathematics. He had a host of things. He would bring intellectuals together for very interesting dinners. You know, some of the guests that he would have had there 10 years ago, you'd have been like envious that you didn't get to sit in on these meals, right? Because what might you've learned. But some of the people that were at the table were bad people doing bad things with him on the side. Here's where I go with this. In Matthew 4 and in Luke 4, in the third temptation of Christ, Satan takes Jesus to a very high mountain, shows him all the kingdoms of the world and their splendor, and then says, I will give you all these if you fall at my feet and worship me. Which implies that we are in cosmos diabolicus. In other words, we live in Satan's world. Now, the people that I think that are the closest to this happen to be people who are in extreme positions of power politically and religiously. And here we have a lot of people who had access to political power, who had political agendas, associating together with each other. And it does appear possible. In fact, it appears likely that they were engaged in some really perverse, ugly things. And this is part of the bond or the glue that pulls them together. That we might even be able to go so far, even in a secular world where a lot of people are uncomfortable with religious terms, but we might even be able to call this satanic, and they probably won't give us their normal objections. We might even be able to say this word evil, and they might go, oh yeah, maybe this is evil.
The outward expression of all of it is just heinous. Whatever they were doing on the back end, conspiratorially to, run their deep state, but the evidence is just unconscionable.
Unconscionable.
Do we have time to do some bonuses here?
Yeah, let's do the first one. Let's see what happens here.
Okay.
I'm calling the first bonus the Special Commission. And I'm sorry, I can't help laughing because I actually heard somebody who said out loud, and they're a political figure, that maybe we need a special, almost outside the government commission to review it. Now, Bill, I find comedy in this because we have state governments and then we have federal governments, and the federal government is the watcher of the watchers. The state governments are watchers and the federal government is a watcher of the watchers. And then we have judges that kind of act as watchers of the other watchers. In fact, we got a separation of powers thing where everybody's watching each other. And all of this is somehow supposed to make us safer. And somebody's standing up in this situation who's at the top of the political food chain. And they're saying, well, maybe we need to have somebody other than the watchers who are watching the watchers, who are all watching each other, watch us or watch the people that might have been involved. Because who knows who's involved? We need another thing. We need yet another. Yeah, we need a watcher of a watcher of a watcher. And so I'm going to title this in, Rocky and Bullwinkle style.
Exactly.
Who watches the watchers, who watch the watchers, or how I learned to love anarchy. Because none of this is working.
It's true. It's comical, but it's true.
Institutions that we have that basically made it possible for these things to happen in the first place. And then to add insult to injury, to make sure they stayed covered over and didn't see the light of day. They stayed in the dark. It was the same institution. It's your government, folks. It's your government. And now, this new idea for a commission of some separate order, I am dubious that it's going to make a bit of difference. Paul Craig Roberts says something to the effect that the purpose of a government blue ribbon commission is to place the blame where it does the least amount of political damage. It's to basically brush most of it under the rug.
Let's see,
That's
Exhibit
what the
A,
Warren
right?
Commission was from.
Warren
That's what
Commission.
most of the Epstein investigations have been.
Yep.
Ladies and gentlemen, the idea that somehow there's somebody's coming to save us and they're from the government. None of this would have happened if we didn't have the government. That's the whole point. And the government is the very entity that has kept you from finding it out. And they're still doing it right now.
Yes. This and many other things.
Yep. We got time for a second bonus too.
Let's do it.
All right. Let's get to this second bonus. The regime media has trashed itself. Now, before the worldwide sickness that we just all recently experienced, Ben Swann was a reporter working for a TV station in Atlanta, and he had a show called Reality Check. It was a segment he would do on the evening news. He would come on and do this, and the last one he did was in 2017. They took him out because the last one he covered was Pizzagate. And here's what they did to him. They suspended him in order to neuter him. They took his segment away. They put him on suspension, and they took the segment away. And they said, if you want to continue to work here, you have to give up all of your social media presence, all of your reach, and just become a regular reporter like everybody else here at the station. And for good measure, they gave it a year where he didn't have this segment, and he had no social media presence, and so that it was completely diluted. Then they fired him. But his last report, the thing that provoked this was coverage of Pizzagate. And he named names that were involved at that juncture and why he suspected they were involved. He didn't actually nail down the claims. He said, we have these suspicious things that have not been investigated. Okay. Yeah. And he laid this all out. Well, then in 2019, Amy Robach was on the set of an ABC show during a commercial break. And she said, I have had the story for 3 years. We've not put it on the air. First of all, I was told who was Jeffrey Epstein. No one knows who that is. This is a stupid story. Then the palace found out that we had her whole allegations about Prince Andrew and threatened us a million different ways. She was frustrated as could be that they had ignored the work that she had done and brushed this story off to the side. What powerful forces took Ben Swann out? Were able to reach down and touch a station in Atlanta. What powerful sources stopped a story from being released by ABC News? Well, it was the regime media, folks. They're connected to the power. They're all part of that same Borg.
Well. They're puppets, though.
To a large degree, yes, they're propaganda instruments. Now, Ben Swann's trying to do the right thing in the system. There are people trying to do the right thing. Amy Robach is trying to do the right things in the system. Others were trying to do the same. They're not the only people that were frustrated and stymied along the way, because there were people aware that there was a big problem. And a lot of them, in order to pursue, the people that chose to pursue this had to leave their employers to continue to pursue the story because the control was that vast, that big. Now,
and we haven't seen any more of that since then, have we?
Well, so this is interesting because we all got a wake-up call, because during the worldwide sickness, Anthony Fauci came on and told you to double mask, just double mask. And probably should get a booster, right? Because we don't know if natural immunity can be trusted. Like, this was what they did. But this is what happened. And the regime media just kept pushing the propaganda down, pushing it down, not questioning it, not resisting it. In fact, you weren't allowed to resist it, was to be called a conspiracy theorist, which they've been doing since 1964, when people did not accept the results of the Warren Commission.
Right.
And that brings us full circle. You can't trust the regime media. You can't trust the regime state. You cannot trust these things. And they're not serving us. They're not serving you. Ladies and gentlemen, if you're focused on whether or not Epstein killed himself, and I happen to believe he did not, you're missing the main part of the story.
Yeah.
If you're focused on what was going on in his sexually perverse life, it's important, but it's not the main story. Now, that was probably necessary to get everybody's attention. But what I've tried to tell you here in this episode is that bigger things are happening, that there are things that you should be aware about your own psychology, how they manipulate you and your neighbors, how international corruption works in the deep state behind the scenes that you did not vote for. And just because today you don't have every single detail nailed down and may never get to that point, doesn't mean that they're not guilty and that we don't need all of this government.